Shocking UFC 295 price tag. Can you afford the front row tickets? If you're in the New York region and have already bought tickets to attend UFC 295 at Madison Square Gardens, we're guessing you're either doing just fine in the cash department or you have no problem adding around $1,000 to your credit card minimum for the November 11th event. If you're the latter, then we would think and/or hope that you're pretty jacked to see the upcoming card. Yes, if you haven't heard, the ticket prices for UFC 295 are pretty insane. So much so, some people have paid out what many folks consider is a good full year's worth of salary for just one ticket. So, just how steep are the ticket prices for UFC 295? And where do they stack up in comparison to other big UFC or boxing cards historically? And is forking out a briefcase full of cash for floor seats even worth it for UFC 295 or any other event? Well, before we drill down on these questions, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to click the thumbs up and to subscribe to our channel. And after you're done watching this video, please weigh in on these questions in the comments section below. Okay, with that out of the way, let's take a closer look at the ticket prices for UFC 295. The ticket prices for UFC 295. Not long ago, a lot of people's jaws were immediately driven to the floor after ESPN reported that the highest ticket price for UFC 295 is $112,236. Now, even if you assume that's for a cage-side seat, you have to admit that's an insane amount of money. Unless you're a billionaire, of course, who routinely drops that amount to fly back and forth on their private jet from their private island. Now, you may also be thinking, well, that's just for the highest price ticket. Surely, there must be some reasonably priced tickets for the card that Joe and Jane Lunchpail can buy, even if those seats immediately include a nosebleed. Well, we hate to inform you that you're wrong. According to some reports, the average price for UFC 295 tickets is close to $2,000, and the cheapest ticket is still in excess of $700 or $800. So that's still a very steep price for most working class folks. Case in point, here are some of the responses that were reportedly fired out via social media after the ticket prices for UFC 295 started making the rounds. That's disgusting, man. The prices are so unfair, it's crazy. The cheapest is like $900, unbelievable. Sitting beside Dana? LOL. Just so Jones can win in 20 seconds? They are smoking crack. This card isn't stacked, and nobody wants to see this fight that bad, LOL. Taking a look at the UFC 295 card. So, we've already talked about how these ticket prices are out of scope for most people. But one of the reasons the prices do seem to be prompting angry responses is because of the card. Now, sure, there's no question that the main event is a pretty significant and historic fight. The headliner will see heavyweight champ Jon Jones take on former champ Stipe Miocic. In Miocic, you have one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, who holds the record for title defenses at 3. In addition, Miocic holds the overall record for most heavyweight title defenses ever at 4. In Jones, you have a fighter who many consider is the greatest of all time. Not only does Jones have the record for most title defenses at light heavyweight with 8, he won the world title at the young age of 23, which is still a record. And those are just 2 of many records Bones holds. So on paper, there's no doubt that Jones-Miocic is a pretty big deal. And if Stipe can become the first person to hand Jones a legitimate loss, it would be a massive addition to his legacy. Likewise for Jones, if he defeats Miocic in what is Bones' second bout at heavyweight. But does there seem to be a lot of buzz for this fight? In comparison to some of the other big UFC bout that generated a ton of hype and moved pay-per-view buys, which was definitely the case with Conor McGregor's fights with Nate Diaz, Dustin Poirier, and Khabib Nurmagomedov? Well, chances are that as the scrap nears and the fighters increase their media appearances, excitement for the bout will build. But given that there doesn't seem to be a huge beef between Miocic and Jones, it would be pretty surprising if it nears McGregor-like levels of interest. But what about the rest of the card, you might also be asking? Is it a super deep card and that's why the ticket prices are so jacked? Well, as this video is being produced, not really. As it stands currently, there are no other title fights on the card. Arguably the most notable bout aside from Jones-Miocic is a strawweight scrap between Jessica Andrade and Mackenzie Dern. There's been rumors and speculation that a welterweight fight between champion Leon Edwards and Colby Covington could be added to the lineup, which would be a big addition, no question. Further, there's been talk that rising welterweight Ian Gary could fight at UFC 295 as well. But even if this happens, will the mainstream masses flock to buy tickets and pay-per-views? Maybe, but it seems kind of unlikely. Okay, but where do UFC 295 ticket prices compare historically? So, sure, the ticket prices for UFC 295 are steep by nearly anyone's standards, even if you account for the fact it's going down in the uber-expensive city of New York, and at a time when 2 bags of groceries can easily cost you $100. But are they in line with other major UFC or sporting events, even if we leave aside the debate regarding the card's depth? Well, the most expensive ticket that went for UFC 287 in April was reportedly around $32,000. That card featured the MMA rematch between Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira, and that was certainly a fight that wasn't short on hype, given that Pereira had bombed out Adesanya last November to end Izzy's first reign as middleweight champ. Now, one could argue that Jones-Miocic is a bigger fight, but is it on par with the biggest fight in UFC history? Namely, the 2018 scrap between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor. After all, that fight headlined UFC 229, which was the biggest fight in MMA history from a pay-per-view stand-up. The card is believed to have sold around 2.4 million pay-per-view buys. As the fight neared, it was reported that the cheapest ticket for the card was going for around $700. That was a significant rise from the prices that were initially announced for the card, which had the most expensive ticket at around $2,500. Of course, given all the nastiness that went down between Khabib and Conor during fight week, you know that some people made a small fortune selling their tickets for UFC 229. But still, to see the price discrepancies here compared with UFC 295 is pretty mind-blowing. Now, if we zoom out and look at some of the biggest boxing matches of all time, the ticket prices for UFC 295 aren't so out there. For example, it was reported that some people with extremely deep pockets paid $180,000 for a ticket to watch the 2015 bout between Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao. That fight is still believed to have been the biggest cash grab in pay-per-view history, with it moving around 4,600,000 pay-per-view buys. The 2017 scrap between Mayweather Jr. and McGregor also prompted some people to put down serious stacks of cash to attend. The most expensive tickets for the fight were around $100,000. Mayweather-McGregor is believed to have sold around 4,300,000 pay-per-view buys to make it the second biggest selling fight in history. So given all this, do the ticket prices for Jones versus Miocic make sense? And what is the experience like with floor or cage-side seats? Now, the question you may be asking is it even a big deal getting floor or cage-side seats? That's a good question. If you have a nicely padded bank account or attended a UFC card back when it's still considered by some as barbaric, you may have already experienced a card with floor or even cage-side seats, or you may have done so at a regional fight card. From a viewing standpoint, depending on where you're situated and whether giants are sitting in front of you, seeing the action while on the floor can actually be kind of difficult. You may have to rely hard on the big screen above. Sitting cage-side, however, can be pretty intense as you hear the violence unfold in a manner that just doesn't translate on TV. You might even have some blood or saliva come firing your way. Of course, another big reason celebrities and rich folks prefer to buy floor seats is because, well, other celebrities and rich people are likely close by. Further, most UFC pay-per-views also feature fighters sitting close to the octagon. So if you're a big MMA fan, then you might get to meet one of your favorite fighters and get a picture snapped with them. Now, it should be also noted that the UFC does offer VIP packages that come with floor seats. It can vary in terms of what you get if you purchase the package, but most of them include all the food and booze that you want, as well as meet and greet opportunities with fighters. In fact, the pricier ones provide buyers with some time to check out the octagon, as well as swanky transportation to and from the event. What do you think? But what do you make of the ticket prices for UFC 295? Do they piss you off? Or do you think they make sense? Hell, maybe you're rolling in dough and have bought some sweet seats for the card. And ticket prices aside, do you think Jones-Miocic is going to be one of the biggest UFC fights to date? Or do you think it's going to be more so in the mid-tier range? Like it was for, say, UFC 251, which saw Jorge Masvidal battle Kamaru Usman for the first time and reportedly sold around 1.3 million pay-per-view buys. Let us know in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and subscribe to KO Central MMA.